So the new news coming out of Afghanistan is that the Taliban is continuing to advance. They've actually surrounded one of the bigger cities there now. That's what I saw this morning. They've taken, over a dozen places since the U.S. began to draw down. Now, interestingly, of course, the media is all over this. And they're all over it because it allows them to pressure the Biden administration from the right, to pressure them from a pro-intervention perspective. As I've pointed out every time we've discussed Afghanistan, the media never really was critical from a non-intervention perspective. So, for example, when we bombed the civilian hospital in Afghanistan, killing a bunch of civilians, it was in the news for maybe a day or two, but it was out of the news pretty quickly. And there weren't these, outcries from the press to pull out and stop doing damage or to stop arming the Afghan army who helped us with that bombing. When we got the story about our allies being warlords with child sex slaves and U.S. soldiers blowing the whistle on our allies, that didn't lead to an outcry from the press for us to get out. When we got the Afghanistan papers, which prove that this thing is, a boondoggle, a quagmire, it's totally aimless. The only winners are the defense contractors, and, it's deep corruption going on there and profiteering. That didn't lead to a sustained outcry to get us out. So you'll notice a pattern here. When things are going wrong and it's because we're there, you don't hear any conclusions drawn, or it's in and out of the media very quickly. When things go wrong nominally because we leave, all of a sudden the media is all over it, and the heavy implication is, look at how irresponsible this is. We need to go back in. So I was nervous, and still to some extent I am nervous, that the more the media covers this, the more Biden is going to feel pressure, like he has to do something, like he has to put more troops back in Afghanistan. Now, again, to be fair, we don't know whether or not Biden will ultimately fully withdraw, take out all the contractors, take out even the U.S. soldiers who are training the Afghan army. We don't know. But as of right now, we left Bagram Air Base, which is, a really big step. And so I give Biden a lot of credit for that. And now with the Taliban advancing, you sort of sit there and watch, and you're holding your breath, and you're going, any day now, he might hit us with, well, we got to send more drones over there. We got to send more air power over there. We got to keep more troops on the ground than we thought we had to keep on the ground because the place is going to shit. And so, what are you going to do? I'm waiting for it. But really, my answer is always the same. I don't want to hear about Kabul or Kandahar until Flint, Michigan is taken care of. I don't want to hear about them until we get our infrastructure up from a grade of D or C- or whatever it is now, according to the Society of Civil Engineers. I don't want to hear about it. But guess what? Now, since the Taliban is advancing and taking over a bunch of places, this clip resurfaced. Now, I don't think I've ever seen this clip, but this clip was during the campaign. Biden went on Face the Nation, and he was asked a question basically about this exact scenario that we're seeing right now. Hey, if we withdraw, because you say you want to withdraw, Joe, if we withdraw and the Taliban starts advancing, don't you own that? Isn't that totally on you for drawing down? And this answer is, I don't know how else to say it, based Joe Biden.
The Washington Post quoted you this week in a story about Afghanistan, saying that back in 2010, you said to Richard Holbrooke, the then envoy, I'm not sending my boy back there to risk his life on behalf of women's rights. It just won't work. Not what we're there for. Is that how you remember it? Yeah, what did you mean?
What I meant was there's 1,000 places we could go to deal with injustice. I can think of 10 countries where women and or children and or people are being persecuted or being hurt. But the idea of us going to be able to use our armed forces to solve every single internal problem that exists throughout the world is not within our capacity. The question is America's vital self-interest at stake, or the vital self-interest of one of our allies at stake? And the fact that they have a system in Afghanistan, as they do in parts of Pakistan, as they do in parts of other countries, that we're going to send troops because there is not a human rights are not being valued to the same degree that we are. That's a different story about sending combat troops. We should call it out. We should go to the United Nations. We should be saying, this is what's happening. We should try to shame and get the world to put pressure on, and economic pressure on people who countries that engage in that, but not send troops. That's what I meant. It is not sufficient. That was my point. And the idea was, and I think Richard had said something like, well, women are being abused there. I said, they're being abused a lot of places around the world. Are we going to send our American forces all over the world to make sure that stops?
But then don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome if the Taliban ends up back in control and women end up losing the rights?
No, I don't. Look, are you telling me that we should go into China go to war with China because what they're doing to the Uyghurs, 1 million Uyghurs out in the West in concentration camps? Is that what you're saying to me?
It was your quote, sir. I was asking you.
No, I know. I gave the answer. Do I bear responsibility? Zero responsibility. Mm-hmm. The responsibility I have is to protect America's national self-interest and not put our women and men in harm's way to try to solve every single problem in the world by use of force. That's my responsibility as president, and that's what I'll do as president.
Damn, son. Damn. Now, I'm not arguing Joe Biden made this point because he has ideological commitments to a non-interventionist foreign policy. We've seen him be interventionist in the past. So it's not even the case that it's, from a principled perspective or an ideological perspective that he's making this argument. I mean, it strikes me like he's honestly arguing this from a cranky old man perspective. Like, don't ask me something like that because you're trying to blame me for something and I don't take responsibility for that. Whatever his reasoning, I don't really care. This answer was based as hell. It's incredibly based. I mean, this is as good as you're going to get from any U.S. politician when it comes to foreign policy issues. And the problem here is the premise of the media. And this is a premise that's shared across basically all of traditional media, which is this idea that the United States is the world police. We should be the world police. It's our job to go around and, bring about justice. And we're the peacekeepers. We have benign, benevolent intentions. And this mindset is not something that they would ever grant to any other nations. So everybody else is viewed as acting from a crude, materialist, selfish, greedy perspective. But we're viewed as, the default perspective is, well, obviously, we mean well because we're us. So for us, it has nothing to do with going around the world and extracting natural resources. It has nothing to do with geopolitics and trying to keep China and Russia in check. It has nothing to do with the fact that war is a business and defense contractors get phenomenally wealthy the more we intervene around the world and drop bombs and do stuff. They don't look at that at all. And in fact, you're called a conspiracy theorist if you bring that up and say it's even a small factor in what's going on. But it really is a crime that the media has this assumption and has this premise that, of course, we're the noble actor around the world. And sometimes we mess up and we mumble and we fumble. But you know what? Ultimately, since we mean well and our intentions are pure, it's a one-off. If we mess up, it's just a mess up and you can't hold us to any standards. Again, international law either matters or it doesn't. Either we all hold ourselves to the same standards and rules and laws, or we don't. We don't have the ability. We don't have the right to just allow ourselves to be above the law and tell everybody else you have to follow the law. And this is the way that we have to start thinking of this. Whenever we break international law, we undermine it because then you give other nations the argument that doesn't matter what I do, doesn't matter if I follow the rules, you guys break the rules all the time. Anytime the U.S. questions some authoritarian nation for cracking down on journalists or locking up journalists, they look at us and say, don't talk to me about any of this. Look at what you did to Chelsea Manning. Look at what you're doing to Julian Assange right now. Look at what's going on with Edward Snowden, who's a whistleblower. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any of it. Invoking, the Espionage Act or something to crack down on whistleblowers and effectively journalists. I don't want to hear it. So the media is just totally misguided and it's pathetic. It's this groupthink. And the other point that's super important is this was going to happen no matter what with the Taliban. Because whether we withdrew in 2005, in 2008, in 2013, or today, or in 2047, whenever we were going to withdraw, this was going to happen with the Taliban. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. It got that name for a reason. And you know what? If China wants to go in there and take a crack at it, which they already basically said they're going to do the Belt and Road Initiative and invest $62 billion in infrastructure in Afghanistan, try to use that so that they can extract the natural resources, the trillions of dollars worth of mineral wealth. Like, okay, I'm against imperialism as a matter of principle, so I don't think anybody should be extracting natural resources for anybody else. But, if they want to try it and they want to end up failing like everybody else failed, by all means, go right ahead. Now, I don't mean that. Don't do it. But if they do it, does that mean the U.S. should rush in and continue permanently occupying it just to stop Russia or China or anybody else from doing the wrong thing? We need to do the thing that's immoral and unethical and wrong and illegal because they might do the thing that's immoral and unethical and wrong for a reason. That's just not convincing at all. But once you acknowledge the reality that this was going to happen with the Taliban no matter what, staying in looks as absurd as it is. And the best part of what Biden said there is, he's asked, don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome? He says, no, I don't. I bear zero responsibility for it. And he makes a great point. He says there's 1,000 places that we can go to fight injustice. And I'll name some more. The Congo, South Sudan. Look at what's happening in Haiti now. Look at Myanmar. Look at what's happening in Myanmar with the Rohingya Muslims, who basically are being ethnically cleansed. So does that mean we should militarily intervene there? And if you say no, on what grounds are you saying no? Because that's arguably a worse humanitarian crisis than anything else we're talking about here. So what do you mean? Biden is accepting the premise there of like, oh, yes, the U.S. does fight injustice, but if there's all these other things that are going on that are unjust, why would we pick and choose this one in particular? I go a step further and say, I don't even buy the premise. Because the reality is oftentimes when we go around the world, we are the ones perpetuating the injustice, perpetuating it. Look at when we armed Al-Qaeda. Look at what we're doing now in Syria. And the list goes on and on. Saudi Arabia is one of our top allies, and they spread a radical version of Islam all around the world. And that's the other thing. They're talking about women's rights. Oh my God, we need to go in to protect women's rights in Afghanistan. If you want to protect women's rights, first things first, your ally, Saudi Arabia, cracks down on women's rights. You want to protect women's rights? Stop arming and funding Saudi Arabia. Stop aiding and abetting effectively a genocide in Yemen. See, we're only responsible for what we do, guys. We're not responsible for the good that we don't do. We're responsible for the bad that we do. And so an easy way to make the world a better place is to stop participating in the bad stuff. Stop aiding and abetting and helping the genocide in Yemen. Stop arming and funding Saudi Arabia. Stop arming and funding Israel and helping fund their illegal occupation and wanton violation of international law. Stop the embargo that we're doing right now on Cuba. Stop the sanctions on Iran, which, these places are struggling with food and with medicine, in large part because of our policies. We're responsible for for our actions. So stop our actions that are actively incorrect and immoral and unethical. That's what we need to do. But if we pull out of Afghanistan and all of a sudden it goes to shit, do we bear responsibility for that? No. If anything, we just shouldn't have gone in there in the fucking first place. But now that we're getting out, should we get back in order to prevent something that's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years anyway? Of course not. Of course not. So, sorry, that was a based Joe Biden answer. And, again, I don't really care. I mean, I wish he was doing this for the right reasons. It might not be for the right reasons, but as long as he sticks to this, I'm going to defend him. No, Joe Biden does not own what happens in Afghanistan now. It's like when we withdrew from Vietnam. I'm sure that led to chaos and all sorts of problems. But the problem wasn't us pulling out of Vietnam. The problem was us ever going in the first place. And as Martin Luther King said, the time is always right to do what's right. And so this is an instance where Biden has actually surprised me to this point, because the fact that he got pulled out of Bagram Air Force Base, it's like, oh, so he might actually be serious about really limiting our footprint in the Middle East. And I'm going to give him credit for that. And if Trump did it, I would have given him credit too. Turns out he didn't. Trump was all talk. So let's see how far Biden goes with this. But the more the media attacks him over this Taliban stuff, the more the media completely loses me. And on this specific issue, I'll definitely defend Joe Biden if he sticks to this. If he reverses, and he very well might, we don't know, then I'll go after him. But right now, props to him. Even though some bad things are happening in Afghanistan, and by the way, are there things he could do that are reasonable? Of course. So, for example, all the interpreters, all the people who aided the U.S. while we were there, they're online to get into the U.S. now, and they need to be approved. I would approve everybody who helped us, everybody who we made a deal with and a promise to. But outside of that, listen, you could arm and fund the Afghan military from now until forever. But if at the end of the day, there's no will, and they just drop their weapons and run into Tajikistan, was it? Is that the border country? The second that they see the Taliban coming, well, then there's nothing we could do to give them the will to want to protect the country if they don't even view as fighting for their country as something they want to do. So, of course, I don't blame Joe Biden for that, and it's ridiculous to blame him for that. Enough with this paternalistic, imperialistic mindset of like, we have to stay to prevent further bad things from maybe happening. No, if you want to make the world a better place, just stop actively participating in the bad things. And I already listed a bunch of things we can do to make the world a better place. So don't fall for the propaganda, because it's exactly that, propaganda. And this argument from Biden is honestly probably one of the best ones I've ever seen him make. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.